The air in the Nashville family courthouse felt heavy, as if everyone inside knew the weight of the decision about to be made. Eleanor Whitmore sat at the polished wooden table, her posture elegant, her face calm but unreadable. Across from her sat Marcus Hale, the man she had once loved, now her greatest adversary. He was well-dressed, his tie knotted perfectly, but his eyes betrayed the strain. He leaned slightly toward his attorney, Thomas Larkin, who was already organizing stacks of paper and exhibits, ready to argue for half of Eleanor's fortune. The judge, Harper, entered with the steady stride of a man who had seen it all before. He commanded silence without needing to raise his voice. His gavel tapped once and the courtroom fell still. Reporters lined the back row, pens poised, cameras waiting just outside. This was no ordinary divorce hearing. It was the trial of a man's ambition against a woman's foresight. Marcus's lawyer opened the case confidently, laying out their demand, half of Eleanor's assets, including her late grandmother, Margaret's estate, a fortune worth several $1,000,000. Larkin spoke with polished phrases, painting Marcus as a supportive husband who had given his prime years to Eleanor and deserved a fair share. Marcus nodded along, wearing the expression of someone who believed he was about to win. But Eleanor sat quietly, her hand resting on her leather handbag. Inside was a single envelope, thin and ordinary on the outside, yet heavy with the power to shift the entire case. The secret lay in a document Marcus had dismissed long ago, one he never thought would matter. She knew the moment she handed it over, the tables would turn. The question in the air was simple, yet enormous. Would Marcus Hale walk away with half of Eleanor's fortune? Or would that envelope reduce his grand ambitions to dust? To understand how they reached this courtroom, we need to return to a very different moment. Eleanor Whitmore was not just wealthy. She was successful in her own right. As the founder of Whitmore Analytics, she advised corporations on risk management and future planning. But despite her professional brilliance, she carried loneliness in her personal life. It was during this vulnerable season, not long after her grandmother Margaret passed away, that she met Marcus. He appeared at a charity gala, introduced by a mutual acquaintance. Marcus had charm in abundance. He was attentive, quick with compliments, and skilled at making Eleanor feel as though she were the most important person in the room. His background was modest, middle management at a regional firm, but he presented himself as ambitious, someone who dreamed bigger than his current circumstances. For Eleanor, who had spent years focused on business rather than romance, Marcus felt like an escape. He made her laugh, whisked her away on weekend trips, and sent flowers to her office, much to the delight of her employees. The whirlwind romance was exactly the distraction she didn't realize she was craving. 8 months later, he proposed during a weekend getaway to Charleston. The night was picturesque, a candlelit dinner, a walk along the waterfront, and a ring presented with a confident smile. "Life is short, Eleanor," Marcus said. "Why wait when you already know?" She said yes, believing his enthusiasm was proof of love rather than impatience. Friends of Eleanor were surprised. Some whispered she was moving too fast. But in her mind, Marcus's devotion was genuine. And after losing her grandmother, the thought of starting a new family chapter was comforting. She told herself that sometimes love arrives unexpectedly, and maybe this was her second chance at happiness. The night before the wedding, Eleanor's attorney, Dana Kessler, met her at a quiet cafe. Dana was sharp, pragmatic, and had handled Eleanor's legal affairs for years. She leaned across the table and said gently, "You need a prenuptial agreement. You know this, Eleanor. Your business, your inheritance, your grandmother's estate, they need protection." At first, Eleanor hesitated. Asking Marcus to sign felt unromantic, almost accusatory. But Dana reminded her that marriage, while built on love, was also a legal contract. If he truly loves you, this won't matter. If he resists, you'll have your answer. When Eleanor presented the prenup to Marcus, she expected at least a discussion. But instead, Marcus laughed, brushing it off as unnecessary. "Do you think I'm marrying you for money?" he said with a grin. "I'd marry you if you had nothing." Without another word, he signed, not even skimming the pages. Eleanor should have found his carelessness alarming, but at the time, she felt relieved. His willingness to sign seemed to prove his sincerity. she tucked the signed agreement away, never imagining it would become the key to her freedom. Dana, however, kept a pristine copy locked in her files. The document was thorough. It protected every asset Eleanor brought into the marriage, excluded all inheritances from division, and waived any right Marcus might later claim to spousal support. It was not cruel. It provided a modest settlement if the marriage ended, but it was clear. Eleanor's fortune would remain hers. The prenup was forgotten in the joy of the wedding that followed. Guests danced, champagne flowed, and Eleanor felt safe in the belief that Marcus's love was bigger than wealth. For a while it seemed she was right, but hidden beneath the laughter and honeymoon glow, Marcus's true ambitions waited. 18 months into the marriage, Eleanor's life shifted dramatically. When her grandmother Margaret's estate finally passed through probate, Eleanor inherited more than just sentimental treasures. The package included Margaret's historic home in the Belle Meade district of Nashville, a carefully managed portfolio of investments, rare first edition books, and a trust fund valued at $2.8 million. It was a legacy not only of money, but of discipline, built by generations of careful saving and sacrifice. Eleanor's first instinct was reverence. She remembered Margaret's voice telling her as a child, "Guard what you build. Money is not just money, it is freedom." To Eleanor, this inheritance wasn't about luxury. It was about responsibility, the foundation of future generations. But Marcus's reaction was starkly different. When Eleanor shared the news, his face lit up with a joy that seemed less about love and more about possession. "We're rich!" he exclaimed, pulling her into an embrace that felt a little too triumphant. That single word, "we," echoed in Eleanor's mind. She brushed it aside, convincing herself it was natural for him to feel included in their shared life. Within weeks, Marcus's behavior began to shift. He quit his job at the regional firm, claiming he wanted to explore new opportunities now that financial pressure was off. Instead of new ventures, his days filled with golf outings, expensive lunches, and shopping trips. Eleanor watched the credit card statements climb with purchases she hadn't approved. Luxury watches, designer suits, and even speculative investments appeared on the balance sheets. When she questioned him, Marcus brushed it off. "Why stress? We can afford it now. Relax, Eleanor. Enjoy the wealth." But for Eleanor, enjoyment was never the point. It was preservation, stability, honoring the legacy she had been entrusted with. She began to notice subtler changes, too. At social gatherings, Marcus spoke as though the inheritance were his achievement. "We were fortunate," he told acquaintances. "My wife and I came into a solid family fortune." Eleanor's name disappeared from his stories, replaced by "we." At first, she dismissed it as careless language. But as time passed, the pride in his voice grew sharper, almost possessive. It was in those moments that Eleanor realized something unsettling. Marcus no longer saw himself as her partner. He saw himself as entitled, and entitlement, she knew, could destroy even the strongest marriage. The cracks began as whispers, but soon became chasms. Eleanor noticed Marcus's spending habits escalate. Golf club memberships, a luxury car financed in his name, but paid with her accounts, a failed investment in a startup pitched by one of his friends. Each decision chipped away at the careful structure of Margaret's estate. The turning point came one night when Eleanor discovered an overdraft alert on a secondary account. Shocked, she dug into the records and found withdrawals Marcus had made without telling her. Tens of thousands spent in a matter of weeks. When she confronted him, he didn't apologize. Instead, he smirked. "What's the point of having millions if we live like paupers? You're too uptight, Eleanor. You need to loosen up." His words cut deeper than she expected. They revealed not only disrespect, but calculation. She began to piece together conversations she had overheard. Marcus boasting to friends at the country club, calling her fortune their wealth. The more she listened, the clearer it became. Marcus wasn't just careless. He was positioning himself as the owner of half of everything she had. Then came the emails. Late one night, unable to sleep, Eleanor checked Marcus's computer. What she found left her breathless. Draft messages to his lawyer, Thomas Larkin, outlining potential divorce strategies. Notes about maximizing settlement, spousal support, and claims to inheritance. Phrases like, entitled to 50%, and documented lifestyle standards. In that moment, Eleanor realized Marcus's devotion had always had a shadow. He wasn't planning for their future together. He was planning for the day he would leave, with as much of her fortune as he could take. The discovery didn't break her. It clarified her. She called Dana Kessler the next morning, bringing the emails and bank statements as evidence. Dana reviewed them quietly, then looked Eleanor in the eyes and said, "We've been preparing for this all along. He thinks he's clever. He has no idea the prenup will be his undoing." From then on, Eleanor stopped playing defense. She prepared silently, carefully. While Marcus strutted around Nashville, spending money and telling stories, Eleanor was building her strategy. And when the day came that Marcus filed for divorce, she did not flinch. She was ready. The courtroom was silent, except for the shuffle of papers, as Marcus's attorney, Thomas Larkin, laid out his case. He spoke with confidence, detailing Marcus's contributions to the marriage. He described Marcus as a supportive husband who had helped Eleanor thrive and therefore deserved half of the estate. Larkin emphasized lifestyle, vacations, and joint decisions, painting a picture of shared wealth and shared effort. Marcus sat back in his chair, a slight smirk on his face, as though he could already see the check being written. Reporters scribbled notes, the audience leaned forward. Everything seemed to lean his way. Then Eleanor stood. Calm, deliberate, she reached into her handbag and pulled out the envelope. She walked to the judge's bench, handing it to the clerk. Judge Harper adjusted his glasses, unfolded the document, and began to read. The silence deepened. The room seemed to hold its breath. Harper's eyes scanned the pages, his expression steady, but at one point, a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He looked up, then back at the paper. "A prenuptial agreement," he announced evenly. Marcus stiffened. Larkin blinked, clearly caught off guard. Eleanor returned to her seat, her face calm, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Harper read aloud the critical passages. All premarital assets excluded, all inheritances excluded, spousal support waived. Every point Marcus's case relied upon was dismantled in a single document. The agreement was clear, thorough, and signed by both parties in the presence of witnesses. Larkin scrambled to object, claiming fraud, claiming Eleanor had pressured Marcus. But Harper raised a hand. "Your client signed this freely. The signatures are witnessed. There is no evidence of coercion." He paused, then added almost wryly, "It seems Mr. Hale's failure was not in being deceived, but in not reading what he signed." The courtroom broke into murmurs. Marcus's face flushed red as he leaned toward Larkin, whispering furiously. But there was nothing to be done. The envelope had spoken, and it had ended the case before it truly began. For Marcus, the moment of realization arrived like a crash of glass. The prenup was real. The judge had recognized it, and his carefully rehearsed claims were slipping through his fingers. At first he sat frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. Then the anger came. He leaned forward, his voice rising in a way that echoed off the courtroom walls. "This is a trap," he shouted. "She tricked me. I didn't know what I was signing. I thought it was just some paperwork." His words spilled out, desperate and sharp, like someone clawing at the last rung of a ladder. Judge Harper tapped his gavel, reminding him to control himself, but Marcus could not stop. He turned to Eleanor, pointing a shaking finger. "You planned this from the beginning. You wanted me locked out of everything. This is fraud." But Eleanor did not flinch. She sat still, her gaze steady, her composure unbroken. She did not need to answer. The document itself had already spoken louder than she ever could. Larkin tried to rein Marcus in, whispering, urging him to stay calm. But Marcus pushed him away. He ranted about how he had given up his career for Eleanor, how he had invested his time and energy into their life. But as he spoke, his arguments crumbled under their own weight. He hadn't given up a career. He had abandoned it. He hadn't invested. He had spent. Judge Harper listened with the patience of a man who had seen many such outbursts. When Marcus finally ran out of breath, Harper leaned forward. "Mr. Hale," he said firmly, "what you describe is not fraud. It is your own neglect. You signed a legal contract without reading it. That is not grounds for overturning it. It is, quite frankly, arrogance." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Reporters scribbled furiously. The judge's words cut through Marcus's anger like a blade. For the first time, Marcus seemed to grasp the truth. He was not just losing the battle. He had already lost. The judge called the room back to order and turned his attention to the ruling. His tone was measured, deliberate, but every word carried the weight of finality. Based on the prenuptial agreement presented, Harper began, Mr. Hale has no claim to Mrs. Whitmore's premarital assets, no claim to her inheritance, and no entitlement to spousal support. The agreement is clear, enforceable, and signed by both parties in accordance with the law. Marcus's face drained of color. Eleanor remained calm, her hands folded neatly on the table. She had known this outcome was likely, but hearing it spoken aloud still felt like the lifting of a heavy weight. Harper continued. Furthermore, the court has reviewed the financial records submitted. Mr. Hale's personal debts, including outstanding loans and credit obligations, remain his sole responsibility. He paused, then added, the total sum as entered into evidence stands at $87,000. The words struck like thunder. Marcus shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening, his eyes darting desperately around the room. He had walked into the courtroom expecting millions. He would leave with debt. Thomas Larkin closed his file slowly, his expression tight. He had fought as best he could, but the law had been against them from the start. Eleanor's attorney, Dana Kessler, simply nodded, satisfied that her foresight years ago had protected her client completely. The gavel came down with a decisive strike. This matter is concluded, Harper said. The audience rose, a murmur rippling through the gallery. Reporters rushed outside to prepare their stories. Husband's claim dismantled by Prenup. Fortune secured by foresight. Cameras flashed as Eleanor left the courthouse, her steps light, her chin lifted. Marcus remained seated for a long moment, staring at the table, before finally rising. His walk was slow, weighed down not just by debt, but by humiliation. Marcus's downfall was swift. Within months, his luxury car was repossessed, his credit cards canceled. Friends who had once toasted him at country clubs avoided his calls. His reputation shrank from confident entrepreneur to cautionary tale. Stripped of wealth, Marcus was forced to move back into his parents' home in a small Tennessee suburb. The man who had once strutted in tailored suits now walked in borrowed clothes, carrying the shadow of his failed ambition. For Eleanor, the outcome was not triumph, but clarity. She did not celebrate Marcus's ruin. Instead, she reflected on the lessons of her grandmother. Margaret had always said money was freedom, but freedom required vigilance. That vigilance had saved Eleanor from years of financial entanglement and emotional manipulation. With the inheritance intact, Eleanor turned her focus outward. She used part of the trust to establish the Whitmore Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal aid and financial literacy for women entering marriage. The foundation's mission was simple: to ensure others had the same protection she had. Eleanor's personal pain became a safeguard for countless others. When asked in interviews about the courtroom showdown, Eleanor always spoke calmly, without bitterness. It wasn't about winning, she said. It was about protecting what was entrusted to me. Love is valuable, but so is foresight. My grandmother taught me both. As for Marcus, he rarely spoke of the case. In Nashville, his name became synonymous with entitlement undone. The story of the man who signed without reading, who tried to take without building, became a reminder whispered in boardrooms and living rooms alike. Contracts matter. Arrogance destroys, and truth always comes in the end.